Nadine Friedline gave birth to her daughter Sydney in April of 2004. The high school teacher took off the rest of the school year and spent all summer enjoying being a mother of two.
She was 8 pounds, 9 ounces, and healthy and chubby and blonde, white blonde hair, and just the perfect little angel. We're talking perfect child. And I had already had a son who was a great baby. So I had something to compare it to, but she was legit perfect. Never cried, happy all the time, was smiling from a month old, just the epitome of this perfect child.
When August rolled around, marking the end of summer break, Friedline left Sydney with a babysitter for her first day back to school.
Sydney was her only child that day. She said they went to Target that morning, and she repeatedly tells me how Sydney was stopping traffic in Target, that she was just giggling and smiling and so happy, and that everyone that walked by him would comment about, how happy she was and how she just lit up the store. Just said she was in the best mood.
That afternoon, the babysitter put Sydney down for a nap alone and on her back. No stuffed animals, no blankets, just a hard mattress and a sleeping baby. The babysitter checked in after 15 minutes to find Sydney had rolled over onto her stomach.
She had just started rolling the day before, and so she went to roll her back over, and when she went to roll her back over, she was unresponsive, and there was no heartbeat. She said she started CPR right away, and while calling 911, and again, it was just too late. She was gone.
Friedline says the mattress was confiscated as part of the investigation, but the authorities found nothing faulty with the product.
There was no reason our daughter stopped breathing other than something, in her brain didn't let her know that she was in a position that she couldn't breathe. And she simply just slept through it.
Sydney is a victim of sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. It's defined as the unexplained death of a child under 1 year of age. Dr. Fern Hauck is a SIDS researcher. She works at the University of Virginia as a professor of family medicine and public health sciences. Hauck says SIDS can be hard for people to understand because it's not as straightforward as other conditions.
It's a diagnosis of exclusion, which really confuses people a lot because it says, well, if you can't tell me that it doesn't really exist as a disorder because it's a diagnosis of exclusion. But I and several other researchers believe that it, in fact, is a syndrome. It does exist as a unique entity with many different causes.
Though the cause of SIDS is still a mystery, Hauck says research heavily supports one main theory.
We do have a pretty strong hypothesis with evidence that there are abnormalities in the brain that occur either during the prenatal period or may even occur after the baby is born, because we know that certain things such as smoking puts babies at increased risk for SIDS, and this could be prenatal use by mother or it could even be postnatal exposure. So it's tricky because you have to study the brains and blood of infants who've died, and then you need to compare them with infants who died from other causes because, you have to use autopsy specimens. So it's very complex, very detailed, very expensive work.
Which is why there are only a few labs across the globe working on SIDS research. Hauck says scientists will often find an abnormality in one baby's brain, but not in the other cases. Despite the inconsistent findings, she does believe a main reason for the deaths is due to a lack of arousal.
So a normal infant, or normal adult for that matter, if you have a pillow over your face and you can't breathe, you're going to kind of move around, you're going to take a deep breath, you're going to do something so that you can start breathing again. And we believe that these infants, for some reason, again, probably an abnormality in their brain somewhere relating to neurochemicals and so forth, interferes with that arousal ability. And so instead of moving the head, taking a gasp, crying to alert their parents, they might just slowly, we believe slowly, their heart stops working, their breathing slows down, and then so eventually they pass away over a period of a few minutes.
Though lack of arousal is the main theory, another popular belief is called the triple risk hypothesis. It involves three components that are believed to cause SIDS when all factors are present. The first risk is a vulnerable infant, meaning an infant with a possible defect in their arousal ability. The second factor occurs when the baby is in the critical stage of development.
So the baby is born and the lower part of the brain is kind of controlling a lot of the things. And then gradually they move forward to the cortical regions where more of the control of the autonomic nervous system, all the things that we take for granted, heart rate, breathing, all of that stuff happens automatically. But early on, the lower brain kind of controls a lot of it, and then it starts gradually moving to the cortex or higher regions. And this happens over the first few months of life. And part of that theory of it happening at a critical stage of development is that the majority of SIDS infants die between 1 and 4 months, and 96% die by 6 months.
Which is during that developmental transition in the brain. The third part of the theory involves the environment, which is the only factor parents can control. The American Academy of Pediatrics outlines the best sleeping environment for a baby with their safe sleep guidelines. The strategy includes how infants should nap alone and on their back on a flat, level surface. These guidelines hope to reduce cases of SIDS, but research into the true cause of the condition still has a long way to go. However, a new paper published in eBiomedicine has recently received a lot of media attention. The researchers discovered that some of the SIDS babies were deficient in an enzyme that helps control arousal. News headlines claimed this study finally found the mysterious reason behind SIDS. But Hauck says that's not true. In fact, the research only included a small number of SIDS cases.
In reality, they only had 26 infants that had died from SIDS or supposedly died from SIDS because they were using spots from some years ago, and the diagnoses were made by coroners in Australia, and we don't know the criteria that were used even to determine whether it was truly a SIDS or not.
A factor that didn't seem to matter to media outlets writing about finally finding the cause of SIDS. That's why Friedline called a friend in SIDS research to fact-check the exciting headlines. Unfortunately, her gut feeling was right.
The title of a couple of the news releases were, SIDS mystery solved. Well, it's not true. This is research, and it was a pretty small sampling. Yes, it is definitely in the right direction. We are making strides in figuring this out, right? And I love everything about that. But there's a lot more research to be done before they can definitively say this is the cause of SIDS.
And though this research is a good step forward, Hauck says it's not the huge leap people seem to think it is.
First of all, this did not definitively find the cause of SIDS. This study has many limitations. Its strengths, and it did find some differences with this particular enzyme, which they were able to locate in the blood from these blood spots. So that's a nice thing because then you don't have to go into brains, right? And you don't have to do autopsies and so forth. So people have been looking for what we call biomarkers. So blood tests, that you can actually take from a baby, a living baby potentially, run a lab test, and then find some potentially a vulnerability to SIDS. Right. So that was what they were trying to show, that they used these blood spots that were taken from infants 2 to 3 days after they were born, and then subjected them to these analyses looking at this butyrylcholinesterase enzyme.
She says that when comparing their findings to the control group, the researchers had considerable overlap, meaning the anomalies were present in both groups.
Therefore, you really could not reliably say that this particular value in a child puts them at higher risk for SIDS because the spread of the results was so great and there was overlap between the SIDS and the controls. So we really don't have a definitive result yet. And plus, it's based on such a small number that you would never make any kind of clinical or public health recommendations based on such a small study that has not yet been reproduced elsewhere. As you've seen even in this study, rarely do you have the exact same findings in every single SIDS case. And same with genetics. A lot of work is being done in genetics. I'm working on a study with genetics, and it's early stages, so we don't have the results of our study yet, but others have found certain genetic abnormalities. But again, maybe you have 30 infants, and that genetic abnormality was found in 10 of them. compared to 0 or 5 in the control infants, the ones who didn't die of SIDS. So it's been really challenging to find one single explanation. We're trying to put all the pieces together.
Another problem Hauck found with the study is that the blood spots used in the paper were done right after birth.
So we don't know if the differences found in the blood spots would be something that would persist as the child gets older, because the child dies again at the age of 3, 4, or 5 months. So are the chemistries the same? Is what's happening in the brain demonstrated by what's happening in the blood? So there's so many different factors that need to be taken into account. And that's why research on the cause of SIDS is so complex, because you have to consider so many different factors.
Factors that Hauck says require much more research. And though our technology and research methods are always improving, Friedline fears she won't be alive to finally know the reason behind her child's death. She says living with the mystery has been the hardest part.
I think our natural instinct as a human being is to place blame and to want answers, when tragedy happens. And the no answers, it's enough to send you to the crazy house. I mean, it really is at times. Everything goes through your mind, was she overheated? Did I have too many clothes on her? Was it something she just ate? Was it this or that? Was the room too hot? Was it the formula I fed her? I gave her the water out of the tap. I mean, everything goes through your mind. But I had to just eventually chalk it up to, she was a gift that God gave me for 4 months. He knew she belonged with him. And I am blessed to my core that he chose me to be her mom.
The Friedline family recently celebrated Sydney's 18th birthday, raising a little more than $5,000 for infant loss resources in her memory.
I love doing things like that. And I love how many people know her and know her story and have hopefully made different choices when caring for their infants because of her and her story and the impact that she's had on people that never even met her. So that makes me happy and makes my heart happy.
Though much of SIDS remains a mystery, you can help protect your child by following the Safe Sleep Guidelines, which can be found at aap.org. You can find more information about Nadine Friedline, Dr. Fern Hauck, and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. I'm Reed Pence. Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
Instead of anorexia, where people who are very thin or emaciated and see themselves as bigger, these are individuals who are quite muscular and they see themselves as too small.
The psychological disorder many bodybuilders view as an asset.
Then many men avoid yearly physicals because they say they're healthier than their peers.
But statistically, it's actually impossible for the majority of men to be healthier than the majority of men. So that just certainly can't be true.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.
I'm Nancy Benson, host of Radio Health Journal. If you enjoy listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
An estimated 100 million Americans were stuck in 100-degree plus heat, shuttered schools, shuttered businesses, and sent electricity costs soaring as more people had to crank up their air conditioners.
The rising costs of more common extreme weather events. Then,
they're circular economies, but they also, while we're sharing our goods and services, we actually come to get to know the people who live around us.
How gift economies help the environment and Americans' wallets. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Viewpoints on your favorite radio station and subscribe and listen to shows anytime on Apple Podcasts and Google Play.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.